Well, Brazilian football legend Pele has died aged 82, with fans around the globe mourning the icon who changed the face of football forever. Representing Brazil from the age of 17, Pele was the only male soccer player to win 3 World Cups and became known as the King of Football, or simply the King, in his home country. Joining me to reflect on the legacy of Pele is former Socceroo Craig Foster. Craig, thanks so much for joining us. And let's just kick it off for people who might not be familiar with Pele, his story, his legacy. What is the story behind the name Pele of this kid who was actually born Edson? How did he wind up with the name Pele?
Oh, he, as a young child, when he loved the game and was playing with just a rolled up old newspapers, in the street. Of course, he came out of poverty. He had a player with the great Santos team that he loved, and he couldn't quite pronounce the name of the player accurately, but it sounded like Pelé, and that stuck from his family. From his father started to call him Pelé, and of course then he became known by that moniker all around the world. And as you said, the king, o rei, as they say in Portuguese in Brazil. And it's a very sad day for not just football, of course. Hundreds of millions of people support the game around the world and loved and revered Pele as an icon of the game, but of course of all sport, and he even transcended sport itself.
But, I mean, that's the incredible thing. It is, of course, a sad day, but it's also a great day to reflect on this incredible legacy that he's had and this incredible trajectory of his life. He went on to be the greatest player of all time and is said to have had more than 1,000 goals under his belt. But as a soccer player, what did you see and what qualities did he have that made him such an outstanding and, as you said, transcendent player?
So he had qualities off the field. He had human qualities that are quite rare. And once he retired, he traveled the world as an ambassador of Brazil. He came to embody what everyone around the world and here in Australia loves about Brazil and Brazilians. Their welcoming, open, loving and joyful nature. That was Pelé. He really represented that. He was the ambassador for football globally as well. And of course, in 1958, James, when he won the World Cup final and scored twice in that, it's just a 17-year-old kid really thrust into stardom, superstardom. That was only 13 years after the Second World War. So, it's not difficult to imagine the impact and the influence only a decade before Muhammad Ali came onto the scene in a like manner of a famous superstar black young athlete taking the world by storm, and over in Sweden, in Europe. So it was an incredibly important moment. This is one of the reasons why he became a loved, iconic sporting figure. When it came to his sporting capabilities, he was just simply extraordinary. He was only 170 centimetres tall, incredibly, but he was both right and left-footed. That meant that he had all of the skills that you see of all of the players today, whether it's Messi or Cristiano Ronaldo or Neymar or anyone else. All of them were wrapped in this one incredibly athletic, incredibly intelligent football persona that was Pelé, and he was quite simply unstoppable, over 1,280 goals.
And you were born towards the end of his career, but do you have any memories of him as a kid, and did he have any influence on you getting into the sport?
Not really, James. However, it's a really important question because this is why we can never reconcile the issue of who is the greatest. Because he retired in 77. Well, I was born in 69, so I was only, 8 years old. Whereas I grew up through the era of Diego Maradona and then later now Lionel Messi. And so we tend to find that those in our younger years, when we grow in our enjoyment and our love of the game, those who are at the very top level in the world and who we watch regularly are the ones who we really resonate to. So those who saw Pelé play, including here in the Sydney Sports Precinct, in 1972 for the great Santos team, would say and still say today that he was the greatest ever. When I was a young player, however, I don't quite know how, but I was from Lismore up in northern New South Wales, and we got hold of a twin set VHS cassettes of what was called Pelé the Master and His Method. And so we watched this so often and so much that we basically broke the VHS cassette in the old player, right? But what it was him just teaching people around the world how to play, how to strike the ball, how to head the ball. I can't tell you the number of times I watched that, but I didn't score anywhere near 1,200 goals, I can assure you.
That's pretty incredible, though, just to think back about the old, VHS cassettes there. Finally, though, before we wrap up, Pele was also a humanitarian ambassador off the field, and you sort of alluded to this before, and that he was said to be the greatest advertisement Brazil ever had. But what were some of the specific causes that he helped draw attention to and bring attention to and, raise support for?
Yeah, well, like all characters, like all lives, they're far more complex than what the public persona is or what the public myths become. But certainly what he was a sporting diplomat. And as a legendary player, perhaps the first. So he became Brazilian sports minister, and then he traveled the world on behalf of both Brazil and FIFA. But if you look at the way FIFA is, and certainly has been in the last 15 years, very famously with their corruption scandals, and prior to that was, very, very similar over many, many previous decades. Pele was a diplomat and was one who rarely spoke out about that. He was really part of the system, and he would travel around the world speaking to presidents and prime ministers and, to the very highest level of dignitaries, and that's what Pele was. He spoke about children's rights a lot, was allied with UNICEF for a very long time, and constantly talked about love and peace. And peace was something that actually he was a big part of creating, at least for 48 hours back in 1969, when he traveled to Nigeria. And this really was the power of the most famous human on the planet in those times, between that 58 and 70 and probably up to 75, 77 when he retired playing for New York Cosmos. He went to Nigeria during the Biafra War, and the warring tribes declared a ceasefire for 48 hours so that he could come out into the community and meet the people. That was the power of the great King Pelé.
What a fascinating life on and off the field. I know I've learned something tonight, and I suspect some other people out there have too. Thank you so much, Craig Foster, for sharing that with us tonight.
My pleasure.